Wonderful, merciful Savior, precious Redeemer and friend, who would have thought that a lamb could rescue the souls of men? Oh, you rescue the souls of men. Counselor, comforter, keeper, Spirit belong to embrace. You offer hope when our hearts have hopelessly lost the way. Oh, we've hopelessly lost the way. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for. Almighty infinite Father, faithfully loving your own. Here in our weakness you find us, falling before your throne. Oh, we're falling before your throne. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for.
Father in heaven, thank you for this day that we're able to come here again through the live stream to be able to listen to a Bible study from the Proverbs. Father, we thank you for the preparation and the time that goes into this to analyze each of the different Proverbs that Jason and Gary present to us. Father, we pray that we're able to take lessons from them and be able to apply them to our lives and learn from them and teach others about them. Father, we pray that you continue to be with our congregation. Let us all continue to stay safe and healthy in every way possible. Pray that you be with our nation through this time. Pray that you give people comfort and guidance in the right things to do. Father, we thank you so much for your Son, the sacrifice that he made. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to be here this evening, and thank you for being here this evening.
I am thrilled to be here.
And thank you to all those people out in streaming land,
In YouTube land,
in
or
YouTube land,
website land, or
wherever they are, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it as we continue to take a look at
The Proverbs.
the Proverbs. By the way,
Mhm.
I am putting these on the internet. If you look on the resources page and look for video Bible studies, I should have all of the Psalm studies and most of the Proverb studies on there. So I'm sure people want to go back and watch these over and over again and tell their friends about them.
It's quality viewing.
And it'll go viral.
Yeah.
On Facebook.
I like it.
And so it's there for posterity, and people can go and watch it and do whatever they want to with it.
That's good.
So it should be under resources, video Bible studies, and it's there.
Share a link with your friends.
Yes. What chapters are we doing tonight?
Oh, we must be starting with chapter 14
So
and going through 17.
15, 16, and 17.
Yeah,
That'll be another 4 chapters.
another 4 chapters.
That's good. And again, with this, there are different categories,
Mhm.
and these categories are arbitrary. As I was going through them, I found some that could have gone in at least 3 different categories.
Sure.
And so we're just dividing them up to try to make some order, but it's not hard and fast and cut and dried. It just gives us some way to organize them.
Mhm.
One of the first things we run into in chapter 14 is wisdom, because in 14 verse 1, it says, "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with their hands." 2 verses later, it says, "In the mouth of the foolish is a rod for his back, but the lips of the wise will preserve them." And on down to verses 6 through 8, "A scoffer seeks wisdom and finds none, but knowledge is easy to him who has understanding. Leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. The wise woman is constructed. We've said all along that the purpose of the wise woman is to build up, and the purpose of the foolish woman or the adulteress is to tear down. Whether it's a young man or whatever it is, they have opposite goals. And so whatever the wise woman does and whatever the wise person does, it is constructive. Whatever the foolish person does, it's destructive. That's just its own nature. The mouth of the foolish is the rod for his back. He creates his own need for discipline. Although he won't take it, he creates the need for it. But the lips of the wise preserve them. Scoffers may seek for wisdom, but they're not going to find it. But knowledge is easy to him who has understanding. Good advice: to leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. You are the company you keep. And if you spend a lot of time around fools, you may not be surprised to find yourself becoming a fool too. We need to keep company with the right kind of people. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. And this may get back to what we've talked about, discipline. The wise person will accept correction. The fool is not going to accept correction. He's going to deceive himself. And so the prudent person is going to understand what's going on and gain wisdom, but the folly of fools is the opposite. It goes on to say that in verses 15 and 16, the naive believes everything, but the prudent man considers his steps. A wise man is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is arrogant and careless. The naive inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge. The crown of the wise is their riches, but the folly of fools is foolishness. And then down in verse 33, wisdom rests in the heart of one who has understanding, but in the bosom of fools it is made known. The naive, by his very nature, believes everything that comes along, but the prudent is the one who considers things. The wise person is cautious and turns away from evil. The fool is arrogant and careless. And there again, we've talked about the fool heading toward the wrong place and the wise person heading away from it. The naive inherit folly, but the prudent is crowned with knowledge. The crown of the wise is their riches, and the folly of fools is their foolishness. And wisdom rests in the heart of one who has understanding, and in the bosom of fools it is made known. It becomes obvious to them sometimes, but it doesn't benefit them any, and it's often too late. Another category that's dealt with in this chapter is integrity. In Proverbs 14, verse 2, he who walks in his uprightness fears the Lord, but he who is crooked in his ways despises him. Down in verse 9, it says, fools mock at sin, but among the upright there is goodwill. And then verses 11 and 12, the house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. There is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. So the one who walks in uprightness fears the Lord, but the crooked one despises God. Fools mock at sin. Among the upright there is goodwill. That is so characteristic of our society today, fools mocking at sin. People ridicule things that are sin, or calling them sin. They praise the things, but they ridicule calling them sin. And so still today, I don't know if it's any worse, but it seems like it's worse. There are a lot of fools out there that are mocking sin, and they refuse to call sin sin.
Right.
And it's a dangerous thing. The house of the wicked will be destroyed. The tent of the upright will flourish. And this is such a wonderful statement. There is a way which seems right to a man. Its end is the way of death. And again, that fits our society so well, that we are so smart that we think we figured it all out. And so we know exactly what should be done and how it should be done. And we're headed right straight to death. And so there is a way that seems right to a man, but it won't take us to the right place. Right. Proverbs 14:17 says, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. Verses 19 through 22, we read, the evil will bow down before the good, and the wicked at the gates of the righteous. The poor is hated even by his neighbor, but those who love the rich are many. He who despises his neighbor sins, but happy is he who is gracious to the poor. Will they not go astray who devise evil? But kindness and truth will be to those who devise good. A quick-tempered person acts foolishly, and the man of evil devices is hated. Evil will bow down before good, and wicked at the gates of the righteous. Then it says the poor is hated even by his neighbor. those who love the rich are many. And I think this may be another case of stating a fact and not necessarily an ideal. It's just reality.
Right.
I don't think this is the right thing because of what he goes on to say. But it's just a fact that the poor are often hated by their neighbors, but those who love the rich are many. But it goes on to say, he who despises his neighbor's sins, and happy is he who is gracious to the poor.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be the contrast between the reality of the situation and the way it should be. He asks the question, will they not go astray who devise evil? And then he says, kindness and truth will be to those who devise good. He says, in the fear of the Lord there is strong confidence, and his children will have refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may avoid the snares of death. Then in verses 31 and 32, he who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who is gracious to the needy honors him. The wicked is thrust down by his wrongdoing, but the righteous has a refuge when he dies. In the fear of the Lord, there's strong confidence in that we pass that on to our children. If we do pass it on to our children, then that gives them a refuge too, something to hang on to. The fear of the Lord is the fountain of life, so that we can avoid the snares of death. And here again, it points out that the one who oppresses the poor reproaches God, reproaches the one who made the poor. We need to be gracious to the needy, and then if we do that, we honor God. The wicked will be thrust down by his wrongdoing, but the righteous has refuge when he dies. And next, we have some passages that deal with work or wealth or the work ethic. Where no oxen are, the manger is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of the ox, in verse 3. And 20 verses later, it says, in all labor there's profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. That first verse there is especially important to me as we think about our children. And as we have our children and the house is messy and the room is messy and the whole thing is chaos, if we just remember this verse, it would re-anchor our whole thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because there will be a day when their room won't get dirty, and that's the day they're gone.
Yeah.
So when your kids are gone, they won't have a messy room. And as long as they're there, and even if they have a messy room, it's better if it's cleaned up. But even if they do have a messy room, that's a good thing, because they were there. I'm not sure that's the point Solomon is making, but that's the point I take from it. But it is that you need to have things going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have oxen around, then you're going to be gaining.
Right.
If you don't have any oxen, you keep your manger clean, but you really don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
And in all labor, there's profit. But if you just talk about it, then you're going to get poor. And that leads to the tongue. In verse 5 of chapter 14, a faithful witness will not lie, but a false witness speaks lies. A truthful witness saves lives, but he who speaks lies is treacherous. And that's just by definition. Someone who's a faithful witness isn't going to lie, but a false witness is going to lie. And we need to remember throughout the Bible what it says about God's relationship with lying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never good. The truthful witness saves lives, but the one who speaks lies creates problems. He's treacherous. Proverbs 14:10 begins to talk about the heart. It says, the heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. Even in laughter, the heart may be in pain, and the end of joy may be grief. The backslider in heart will have his fill of his own ways, but a good man will be satisfied with his. A heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. Sometimes we may think we understand what's going on with somebody, and we don't. And they may be the only person that understands what's going on. And so we need to leave room for that. We think we can step in and help sometimes, and sometimes it's the best situation just to be quiet,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know what's going on. And even if we're not a stranger, sometimes we don't share what's going on in somebody's heart. So we need to be sensitive to that. Even in laughter, there may be pain. Even if your heart is laughing, there may be pain. And the end of joy may be grief. The backslider in heart will have the fill of his own ways. That's not necessarily a good thing. But the good man will be satisfied with his ways. In verses 29 and 30, he who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts folly. A tranquil heart is life to the body, but passion is rottenness to the bones. The one who is slow to anger has great understanding. Sounds like something James might say.
Mm-hmm.
The one who's quick-tempered exalts folly. The tranquil heart is life to the body, but passion is rottenness to the bones. And that word passion can mean a lot of different things. A lot of times passion is a good thing. Someone's passionate about a cause. They're really into it and it's important to them. That's not the word here. And the word means jealousy, anger, envy, rivalry, zeal. And we were talking a little bit earlier, and you were pointing out that this rottenness means what? What's the counterpart of that?
It's like spoiled meat. It's just something that you wouldn't want to hang on to.
That reminds me.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. We got up this morning and there was a dead cat in front of our porch. I don't know what happened, but I put on my gloves, my latex gloves, and I got a big trash bag and picked him up and put it in there. Of course, our trash was picked up yesterday, of course, but the trash at my mother's old house is picked up tomorrow morning. And so I hauled it over to her house. That thing already stunk so bad. I had to have my windows rolled down. And it had only been there for a few hours. I cannot imagine what it would have smelled like if it had been there for days and days and days. That's what it's talking about here. That kind of stinking rottenness, bad meat. If you've ever smelled bad meat, we left one time to go, it was a Christmas vacation or something. Apparently, as we shut our door, the freezer went out. We just bought a whole freezer full of meat.
Oh no.
And we walked in the door coming home, and you have never smelled a smell like that. And so, again, that's what it's talking about here, this stinking meat. If anybody's experienced that, they know that jealousy is not a good thing.
Right.
Anger and envy and rivalry and zeal stink like dead meat. Okay, back from our little trip. There is really good advice for a nation here in this chapter. In verse 28, in a multitude of people is a king's glory, but in the dearth of people is a prince's ruin. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. The king's favor is toward a servant who acts wisely, but his anger is toward him who acts shamefully. In a multitude of people is a king's glory, in dearth of people is a prince's ruin. A king wants to have a lot of subjects, and if there aren't many people there, there's not much to pass on to the prince. And the same thing is true in the Lord's church. The Lord's church is never going to be the majority because it's always the narrow path, and we know that. But it's glory to Jesus and to God when there are people in the kingdom. And that's one of the reasons that I'm happy to hear babies in church.
Right.
If you go to a congregation where there are no babies and you hear no baby sound, then that's a dead church. And so I'm grateful when I hear babies crying. Not that I'm a big supporter of chaos, but I just think it's a beautiful sound.
It is.
And because when there are more people, it's glory to the king. And we serve a certain king. Then this one, righteousness exalts a nation. Sin is a disgrace to any people. I just wish that we could learn that lesson in our country. All countries, not just ours, but all around the globe. That righteousness will exalt us, but sin is a disgrace. The king's favor is toward a servant who acts wisely. His anger is toward him who acts shamefully. That brings us to chapter 15 of Proverbs.
Chapter 15. And in a similar way, we've just kind of divided that one up into different categories or keywords in specific verses. And as you mentioned, we might arrange, if we did this again over the same chapters next week, we might arrange them differently.
They would probably look a little bit different. Yeah.
And as if anyone would like to do a little more in-depth style of Bible study, taking the Proverbs and doing this as an exercise has been very interesting.
It is.
And I've learned a lot. So
yeah.
Take a chapter of the Proverbs and just get it, put it into a Word document and just start rearranging verses so that you put them together. And that's okay, right? To rearrange those verses.
Yes, it is.
Because those...
I'm sure along the way we missed something. There's probably some glue that holds everything together, but we missed it.
We're not... It's not like changing the narrative text of a story and putting things in a different order.
No, we're not taking anything out or adding anything
so,
to it. We're just trying to put them in categories.
Right. So, and it helps you see some things... It helps you see things differently than you do as you read straight through it.
And for a type A personality, it kind of helps you wrap your mind around
there
it.
You go. Gets a little organization there for you.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll start out with a discussion of the mouth or the tongue or the lips from Proverbs chapter 15. Verses 1 and 2 starts out, a gentle answer turns away wrath, But a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable, but the mouth of fools spouts folly. And then we continue on with that same theme, verses 4 and 7. A soothing tongue is a tree of life, but perversion in it crushes the spirit. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, but the hearts of fools are not so. And then continuing with verses 14 and 28, the mind of the intelligent seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feeds on folly. And then the heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. And so here we have that contrast between the wise use of the tongue and the foolish use of the tongue. And some of those things that the wise person uses their tongue, they turn away anger, which I think the more mature I get, have an appreciation for that, especially as our world becomes more and more saturated with social media, and it's so easy to spout off and just stir up trouble and then walk away and leave people arguing behind you. That's not very wise.
Mm-hmm.
A wise tongue turns away anger, and we need to be people who are deflecting that anger and pointing the glory to God. But a wise tongue also makes knowledge acceptable, is a tree of life. A wise tongue spreads knowledge. And then I really like this one too. The righteous ponder how to answer. Thoughtful answers are much more helpful than knee-jerk answers when we're thinking, especially about very serious, very deep topics. And it made me think of another verse. I know we're not supposed to bring in New Testament stuff, but there's a verse that says to be slow to speak.
Isn't that one I kind of sneaked in a little bit a while ago?
You alluded to that a while ago
yeah,
too. So
yeah.
we're both guilty.
We were both guilty of the same verse.
But that idea of just being slow to speak and not flying off the handle and giving a quick answer that is it going to end up in the end being wrong or being something that you have to try to take back or correct, but you've pondered it, you've thought about it, and now you've given the right answer. Contrast that with the foolish use of the tongue, and the foolish just does the exact opposite of things. Foolish stirs up anger. I'm sure we've all known people who love to just kind of lob that hand grenade into the room and make a comment and then sit back and watch the argument start. They're not much fun to be around. And the foolish person spouts folly. You can't trust what they say. They crush the spirit. They feed on folly and they pour out evil things. And that's in contrast to the wise man who ponders what he's going to say and thinks it through so that he says something carefully. But the foolish person it's a constant spewing of evil that comes out of their mouths. And it's not fun.
No, it's not.
Our next category there in chapter 15 is the category of reproof or discipline. So verse 5, a fool rejects his father's discipline, but he who regards reproof is sensible. Verse 10, grievous punishment is for him who forsakes the way. He who hates reproof will die. Then verse 12, a scoffer does not love one who reproves him. He will not go to the wise. And then verses 31 and 32, he whose ear listens to the life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. He who neglects discipline despises himself, but he who listens to reproof acquires understanding. The contrast in these verses between those who accept reproof or discipline and those who refuse to accept it. And the simple question is this: how can you learn if you don't accept reproof? If ours is to be a life of growth, a life that is a progression towards a goal of becoming more and more like God, more and more like Christ in our lives every day, then we have to accept reproof and discipline. If we're not willing to accept reproof and discipline, then we can never grow. And it's a life wasted.
It is.
So we've got to be the wise people there to accept that reproof. Another category in chapter 15 would be the category of the Lord. These verses all contain the word Lord, and so we have our mentions of God in this chapter that are very interesting to look at. Verse 3: the eyes of the Lord are in every place, watching the evil and the good. Verses 8 and 9, the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he loves one who pursues righteousness. Then verse 11, Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of men? Verse 16, better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it. And then verses 25 and 26, the Lord will tear down the house of the proud, but he will establish the boundary of the widow. Evil plans are an abomination to the Lord, but pleasant words are true. Verse 29, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. And then verse 33, the fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom, and before honor comes humility. From these verses, we see that the Lord sees all that takes place in the lives of the righteous and the wicked. He sees it all, and he understands everything that's taking place. He understands the motives behind it in ways that we never can, and he's able to make those judgments between the righteous and the wicked. And so the Lord approves of the actions of the righteous, but the ways of the wicked are an abomination. Verse 11, Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. Sheol and Abaddon are the realms of the dead. And so the Lord can see into places that you and I can only imagine about. We can't even begin to understand what the afterlife is like, and yet the Lord has perfect vision of that. He understands what it is. He sees it. And then so if he can see that, how much more so then can he see into our lives? And he understands us. So that's just an interesting perspective there that we need to understand. We can't hide things from God. And so we need to be moving in his direction all the time because he sees what we do anyway. Our next category there is the category of joy or cheer. This is a happy category. Proverbs 15:13, a joyful heart makes a cheerful face, but when the heart is sad, the spirit is broken. Verse 15, all the days of the afflicted are bad, but a cheerful heart has a continual feast. Verse 20, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. And then 21, folly is joy to him who lacks sense, but a man of understanding walks straight. Verse 23, a man has joy in an apt answer, and how delightful is a timely word. And verse 30, bright eyes gladden the heart, good news puts fat on the bones. There are benefits to living a joyful life. Have enough studies been done by scientists to show that?
I think so. I think it's just pretty well a done deal.
And it's interesting when scientists do their studies and it confirms what the Proverbs already
Isn't
told
that
us.
amazing?
Isn't it
It's
amazing?
incredible.
And so if we are people who live a genuinely joyful life, there are benefits to that. There are emotional benefits. There are societal benefits. There are health benefits. It just benefits every aspect of your life. But that joy must be founded upon righteousness. The fool would try to convince you that he is living a joyful life in stirring up anger and stirring up strife and following after his own passions and lessons, those things. He would try to convince you that there's joy in that. But it's not the kind of joy we're talking about. There's a joy that is based upon living the way God has instructed us to live, and that brings benefit to our lives.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then we have the kind of catch-all category of miscellaneous.
We need some miscellaneous
we
categories.
Need some miscellaneous, and it's not that there are just kind of one-off proverbs that we never see about it. It's just that in chapter 15, these don't fit into a bigger category, but we probably see more just like them in chapters 14, 16, whatever. So
yeah, this would work into wealth or work, that category, the work ethic, but not in this chapter. There aren't enough of them.
In this chapter, there just weren't that many of those type of verses. So verse 6, great wealth is in the house of the righteous, but trouble is the income of the wicked. And what a true statement. Some of these you just don't have a lot to add.
Yeah, you just say, well, duh.
Yeah. Verses 17 and 19, better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox served with hatred. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but the slow to anger calms a dispute, rather. The way of the lazy is a hedge of thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. I like that first one, a dish of vegetables where love is. I'd rather eat a plate of carrots in a house where I'm loved than a 7-course meal in a house where I'm not appreciated.
No, it's
a
world of difference.
Yep. Verse 22, without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. How does that fit with our modern day proverb of too many cooks
spoil the broth?
Spoil the broth.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile those?
There's the cooks thing is too many people sticking their hands in something.
Okay.
And trying to do it themselves. But this is more of getting advice.
Okay.
And the more advice you get, it might not hurt to get some different recipes about how to make the broth, but you don't want them all coming over and throwing in the ingredients.
Right.
And so it may be a difference between sticking your hands in something and giving some instructions, some advice.
Getting a second opinion or a third opinion or a fourth or a fifth sometimes is a good way to go.
And this may get back to what you were saying just a little while ago about accepting reproof or correction or instruction. Sometimes it may be positive, it doesn't have to be negative. And the more input we're willing to accept, the more options we have, and the more wisely thought out our decisions will be, because we'll have more to go on.
Good. All right. Verse 24 then says, the path of life leads upward for the wise, that he may keep away from Sheol below. And then verse 27, he who profits illicitly troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live. So then just in that miscellaneous section there, we had instructions that were regarding true wealth, instructions regarding loving each other, anger, laziness, collaboration. There's that idea of seeking advice, and then conducting business in an honest and truthful way. There's just so many subcategories in each chapter.
Yeah. And I guess we'd have to rearrange the whole book of Proverbs to put everything together that goes together from different chapters. And that'd be a big job.
That'd be a big job.
In chapter 16, it starts talking about the heart. In verse 1, it says, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Everyone who is proud in heart, it says in verse 5, is an abomination to the Lord. Assuredly, he will not be unpunished. In verse 32 says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. We may have our plans. The plan of the heart belongs to us, but the real answer is from God. He's the one that has it. The one who is proud in heart is an abomination. And then instead of a but or an and, assuredly he won't go unpunished. And that's what connects those. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. Then it goes on to talk about integrity. In verse 2, all the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but the Lord weighs the motives. And in verses 6, 7, and 8, by loving kindness and truth, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord one keeps away from evil. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Better is a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. And it gets back to that, everybody thinks his way is right, but that doesn't make it so. So all the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but God, he gets behind that and weighs the motives. By loving kindness and truth, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord one keeps away from evil. When our ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even our enemies be at peace with him. And that may get back to what you were saying before about turning away anger and how we use our tongue. And if we truly put into practice what God tells us to do, it's going to create less anger instead of more. And then better is a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. And that's back to better is a meal of vegetables than a huge meal with hatred. And it goes on, it says that just balance and scales belong to the Lord, and all the weights of the bag are his concern. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He who watches his way preserves his life. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It is better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. A just balance and scales belong to the Lord, and all the weights of the bag are his concern. God is very concerned about honesty. Back in a few hundred years ago, in every medieval city, at the city hall, they had pieces of metal embedded into the wall that were the official measurement. This is our yard. This is our foot. And if someone bought something, they could go back and see if that merchant had cheated them. Sometimes people had two sets of weights. There was a set of buying weights and a set of heavy weights. And if they were buying something that was kind of heavy, their pound was really a little bit more than a pound. But if they were selling, it came up kind of light. And that God does not like that.
That's right.
There was a Christian that we knew that had been an inspector for the ag department. He inspected scales at butchers. And apparently there was something that was a habit of some butchers back then. But whenever he would see a butcher doing it, the butchers would put their finger on the scale as they were weighing something, and they'd pull it down. But he knew what they were doing. And he said, if you want that finger to go with it, you leave it right there.
Yeah.
And they took the finger off of the scale because they didn't want it to go with it.
Yeah.
But God does not like that.
No.
He does not like dishonesty. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil, and the one who watches his way preserves his life. This very classic statement that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It's better to be of humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. And then we go back to that vegetables and a big meal. In verse 25, he says, there's a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. A man of violence entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. He who winks his eye does so to devise perverse things. He who compresses his lips brings evil to pass. A gray head is a crown of glory. It is found in the way of righteousness. And just what we've seen a little bit before, there's a way that seems right to man, but the end is not the right one. A man of violence entices his neighbor, and he leads him to places that's not good. And the one who winks with his eye, he does it to devise perverse things. The one who compresses his lips brings evil to pass. The gray head is a crown of glory, and it is found in the way of righteousness. Like the gray head is the wisdom. As people get wiser and wiser and wiser, that's found in the way of righteousness. There are some comments about work in this chapter. In verse 3, commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be established. In verse 26, a worker's appetite works for him, for his hunger urges him on. We need to devote everything we do to God, and if we do that, the outcome is going to be good. If we devote everything to our own selfish ways, it's not going to end up the way we want it to. But if we commit our works to God and do everything His way, then our plans will be established. And a worker's appetite works for him, for his hunger urges him on. There are some passages that point to the providence of God. Verse 4 says, the Lord has made everything for its own purpose, even the wicked for the day of evil. Verse 9 says, the mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And then in verse 33, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. There's a purpose for everything, including the wicked. And that's just not a good result. The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord is the one who directs his steps. We may have some plans, but if we let God direct our steps, then we're going to end up in a good place. And the lot is cast into the lap. Every decision is from the Lord. And I think this was true back in the days when God controlled things like that. I don't think we're going to roll dice today and get anything other than the law of probability. But back then they could cast these lots, and God would influence the outcome. If they needed to choose an apostle to replace Judas, then they did this, and the decision was from God. And so I don't think it's necessarily true today that we can do this to see whether God supports something or not.
Right.
But it was true then. And I think that today we just need to do everything we can to make sure whatever decision is from God. We're not going to be able to flip a coin and get that, but we still need to do that. And then it talks also about the nation. In verse 10, it says, the divine decision is in the lips of the king. His mouth should not err in judgment. And it was so important back then for the king, and it's so important today for the leaders to have good judgment, have good motivation, good information. It's best if what our leaders do is based on God. And then things are going to go well. It says in verses 12 through 15 that it is an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for a throne is established on righteousness. The righteous lips are the delight of kings, and he who speaks right is loved. The wrath of the king is as messengers of death, but a wise man will appease it. In the light of a king's face is life, and his favor is like a cloud with a spring rain. And again, this is an ideal. And various places in the New Testament it points out that our governments are established by God. And so we need to understand the intended role of these in God's service, that it is an abomination for any ruler, any leader to commit wickedness, because our throne is established on righteousness. The New Testament tells us that it's there to punish evildoers, that the governments are there to punish evildoers, and that's their purpose. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and the one who speaks right is loved. The wrath of a king is as messengers of death, and the wise man will appease it. And in the light of a king's face is life. His favor is like cloud with spring rain. There are also some thoughts about wisdom in verse 16, how much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen above silver. Verses 20 through 22, he who gives attention to the word shall find good, and blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. The wise in heart will be called discerning, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Understanding is a fountain of life to him who has it, but the discipline of fools is folly. How better it is to have wisdom than gold. How often do we run into that in Proverbs? The value of wisdom is greater than anything else. To get understanding is to be chosen above silver. The one who gives attention to the word will find good, the one who trusts in the Lord is blessed. The wise in heart will be called discerning, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. And understanding is a fountain of life to the one who has it, but the discipline of fools is their folly. They don't take it. They don't accept the discipline. And then the tongue, verses 23 and 24. The heart of the wise teaches his mouth and adds persuasiveness to his lips. Pleasant words are honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. A worthless man digs up evil, it says in verses 27 and 28, while his words are as a scorching fire. A perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. And so the heart of a wise teaches his mouth and makes his lips more persuasive. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb. They're sweet and they're healing. But the worthless person digs up evil. His words are like a fire. And the perverse man spreads strife, and the slanderer separates intimate friends. So there's a contrast there between the wise and their lips, and the worthless one and the perverse one and their lips and their tongues. And then that brings us to Proverbs chapter 17.
Proverbs 17. All right. Again, with the division into categories here. The first one is on quietness.
That's a good thing.
Verse 1 starts out, better is a dry morsel and quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife. Verse 7, excellent speech is not fitting for a fool, much less are lying lips to a prince. Verse 9, he who conceals a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates intimate friends. And then verses 27 and 28, he who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. There is this one's okay to quote because this is from the Old Testament. In Ecclesiastes, there's that section of there's a time for this and a time for that. One of those is there's a time to be silent and a time to speak.
Yeah.
And the fool doesn't understand that distinction, but the wise man does. The wise man understands that there is a time when quietness, silence is the best course of action. And I like that last verse that we read there, that silence is powerful enough to make a fool appear wise. And that's pretty powerful.
And I think we've mentioned before, it's better to keep your mouth quiet and let everybody think you're a fool than to open your mouth and prove it.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm working on learning that lesson.
That's a good lesson for all of us to learn.
There's another category here, the category of the son, and we're used to this category from looking at our, the first 9 chapters that we saw, those instructions to the son, but there's still a lot to say about sons, even in this section of Proverbs. Verse 2, a servant who acts wisely will rule over a son who acts shamefully and will share in the inheritance among brothers. Verse 6, grandchildren are the crown of old men, and the glory of sons is their fathers. Verse 25, a foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her who bore him. Simple lesson there, a child who learns wisdom is a joy to his parents. A child who behaves foolishly brings grief and bitterness. That's just something worth knowing.
It is. Very much so.
A related category here, I think, for the way that the word son is used in those previous verses would be the topic of the fool. Verse 12, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. Never met a bear robbed of her cubs.
I don't think you want to meet a bear robbed of her cubs.
That's a very potent word picture there for us to think about how bad it is to run into a fool who's trying to involve you in his folly.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 16, why is there a price in the hand of a fool to buy wisdom when he has no sense?
Good question.
That's a great question. One of the things that we'll see in some future chapters is when a fool gets his hand on the Proverbs and tries to make use of them, but he hasn't really learned wisdom. It's like a carpenter trying to use the wrong tool to do the job. I mean, you just can't get the job done if you don't know how to use the wisdom that's in the Proverbs. So it's an interesting scene. Verse 18, a man lacking in sense pledges and becomes guarantor in the presence of his neighbor. We talked about that in an earlier lesson. You talked about being a surety and being willing to take on somebody else's debt.
Yeah.
And in the case where it's a fool, you don't want to
No.
take on their debt.
No, you don't.
And now verse 21, he who sires a fool does so to his sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. Verse 24, wisdom is in the presence of the one who has understanding, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth. The fool brings destruction upon himself and those around him. You know, the Proverbs just doesn't have anything good to say about a fool.
No, and most of it's just pretty self-explanatory.
It really is.
Pretty obvious. And I love that one about him having the money to buy wisdom, but he doesn't know what to do with that.
Right.
I love that.
Another category would be those who pursue wickedness. Verses 4 and 5, an evildoer listens to wicked lips. A liar pays attention to a destructive tongue. He who mocks the poor taunts his maker, and he who rejoices at calamity will not go unpunished. Verse 11, a rebellious man seeks only evil, so a cruel messenger will be sent against him. Verse 13, he who returns evil for good, evil will not depart from his house. Verse 15, he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous, both of them alike are an abomination to the Lord. And let's stop right there for a second, because again, we talk about the application to our current national situation. The idea of how many things that are biblically condemned do our societies hold up as being things which are righteous and good, and how many things which the Bible says are righteous and good does our secular society say these things are to be condemned. And so our society just has things backwards.
Totally backwards. Almost everything.
Yeah.
They call the evil good and the good evil, which reminds me of another passage, but that's another place.
Right. And so that's an abomination to the Lord.
It is.
And we can't sustain that. We can't continue down that path without the Lord acting.
No. And there are the people who do this are so smug about it.
Mhm.
And my thought is, let's talk about it again in 100 years and see who's happy.
Yeah.
Because we can argue about it all we want to, and they think that we're just ignorant and backward. But that's not going to be the case 100 years from now, because it's not going to be opinion anymore.
Right.
And I'm sad that it's that way. I don't like it, but that's the reality, that there will be a day when the truth is obvious.
Mhm.
And you can play around with it all you want to here. That does not change the outcome.
I'm confident in where we have placed our trust.
I am too. I know whom I believed, and that he is able to. Oh, that's another
That's
verse.
another verse.
Sorry.
I wasn't going to go
Sorry. Okay.
Continuing on then with those who pursue wickedness, verses 19 and 20, he who loves transgression loves strife. He who raises his door seeks destruction. He who has a crooked mind finds no good, and he who is perverted in his language falls into evil. So verse 26 then, it is also not good to find the righteous, nor to strike the noble for their uprightness.
And that reminds me of a passage an idea that we'll run into occasionally in Proverbs. It is not right to favor a rich man against a poor man, but it's also not right to favor a poor man against a rich man just because of the riches or lack of riches.
Right.
Justice works both ways. And it's not acceptable to go either way. It's not okay to favor a poor man against a rich man just because the poor man's poor.
Right.
And it's not good to find the righteous just because they're righteous, or to strike the noble because they're doing what's right.
Just in this section, we saw that there are those whose feet run toward evil. That reminds me of another passage.
Man, there's so many passages we're not putting in here.
They rejoice at the misfortune of others. They seek to return evil to those who show them kindness. They love strife, and they justify their wickedness. There's just no lower category of person, I don't think.
Isn't that sad?
Then we're on to that catch-all miscellaneous category. So we're kind of into these one-off proverbs for this chapter where they don't fit.
What if we do that for every verse?
We can just declare every verse miscellaneous.
Yeah.
There we go. So verse 3, the refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests hearts. So it reminds me of another passage, by the way.
Oh, man.
Refining fire. But
Yeah.
our next verse then is verse 8. A bribe is a charm in the sight of its owner. Wherever he turns, he prospers. We talked a little bit about this one before we started recording, because it almost sounds like a bad idea. It almost sounds like bribery is a good thing because it causes prosperity. But I think we're viewing this as first of all, not all of the Proverbs. Sometimes Proverbs tell things like they are instead of like they should be.
Mm-hmm.
They're descriptive rather than prescriptive in some cases. And so if you can point to somebody who says, I profited from bribery, or bribery was a good thing in my life, well, that's the exception, not the rule. And then we also have to talk about long-term consequences. We need to talk about the spiritual benefits or problems with that. We also need to talk about somebody's character and somebody's reputation and how being involved in something like that will affect those things, not just their pocketbook. And so I think there's some ways in which we can put this into the context where it makes sense, that it's not telling us that bribery is a good idea. Verse 10, a rebuke goes deeper into one who has understanding than 100 blows into a fool. You just can't beat the foolishness out of some people, I think is what it's saying there. And if they're not going to learn from reproof, from discipline, you can reprove and discipline them 100 times and they're just not going to learn from it.
Yeah.
Verse 14, the beginning of strife is like letting out water. So abandon the quarrel before it breaks. I saw a video just last night, recently up in Michigan. There was flooding, and you could find the video of a levee collapsing, of a dam collapsing on a lake that had been there for 100 years. It had been man-made back in the 1920s. And once that dam started to go, there is no force on earth that could have stopped it. It would have required God acting in a miraculous fashion. And so once you start letting that strife out, once you start stirring up trouble, it's coming. And so better to stop it before it starts.
Isn't there a story about a little boy in Holland who stuck his finger in a hole in the dike, in the levee?
Yeah.
Because if he wouldn't have, the water would have gotten more and more and it would have burst. And so it's better for us to stick our finger in a little bit of strife at the beginning than to let it keep on going, keep on going, keep on going.
Right. Verse 17, this is a great one, probably one that most people know. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. That's a good one. If you can get to the end of your life and somebody quotes this verse about you and says this describes you,
yeah,
I think you've lived a successful life.
I think so too. I think you're right.
Verse 22, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. This one would have fit great back in chapter 15 with our cheer and joy category.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Do you have any questions?
We've got some questions. We've got lots of questions.
Oh, wow. We have some questions. We
Yeah.
have 1, 2, 3, 4. How many is that? 7?
It's like 7 or something.
7 or 8 if you count the one. The first one is 2. Can they handle it?
Yeah, because we've covered it.
Okay, that's right.
What does the wise person do to his or her house? And what does the foolish person do?
Yeah, isn't that kind of interesting?
Contrast.
I wonder what they do.
What does righteousness do for a nation?
And what can we learn from that?
That's right. How do the wise use their tongues and how do the foolish use their tongues? What good things come from listening to reproof or discipline? What are the benefits of being joyful? Why is it beneficial to know when to be quiet? Who should determine the decisions in our lives?
Okay. Who should determine the decisions in our lives? And if we could figure that one out, that might help with all those other things.
I agree.
Are you going to be available next week?
Lord willing.
Creek don't rise?
It was trying to rise.
It's going up a little bit this week, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I think I can be here, and if you can be here, if they can be here, we'll all be here.
We'll cover 4 more chapters.
That will be tonight. It was 14, 15, 16, and 17. So we'll do 18, 19, 20, and 21. We are marching right along.
There we go.
Have you decided how we're going to do chapter 31 yet?
I think we should arm wrestle.
Okay.
Decide who gets to do it.
We'll flip a coin. We'll do something.
Okay.
We'll do every other verse, or
All right.
we'll run it some way.
Okay.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks.
All right.